And we'll begin with a roll call.
Ms. Kohler? Mr. Shulman?
Here.
Mr. Stelzer?
Here.
Chairman Homan?
Here. And so I'll take a motion to approve the minutes, the motion summary of our May 25th, 2017 meeting.
I move that we approve the motions.
Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We have an outstanding issue from the last meeting, which Darren hopefully will refresh us on.
Last meeting we went through the changes to our schedule and we approved all of them, but basically 1.5, 2. But the main one is this issue of the personnel background materials. We went back. You asked us to kind of work with Bruce, Chief Janowski. We did that, and in sort of a hybrid compromise plan, we split off that one handling, which is DAS 003 on the draft you've been provided, and turned it into 003 and 004. According to Bruce's team at the police department, most of the materials in that background records they do not need, but he suggested that we keep the background investigative report and liability waiver. That is the investigation that the officer does, the kind of the background check, the final step. It's like a checklist sort of thing. He recommended we keep that for 5 years, not because they ever use it, but some of the officers were concerned there may be a loss, wrongful hiring. We've never had that here, but for the amount of paperwork and work that would to keep that for 5 additional years, we felt that that was a reasonable way to minimize some risk. So that's why you have DAS 003 and 004. I don't think we discussed it at the last meeting because it wasn't right to bring up, but we've been also trying to deal with this issue of training and certifications. A lot of the personnel files are just overflowing with every time someone goes to a online class or a training session or something, they get a certificate. We did make the change last time that training and certifications were only required for the position that was worked it out with Police Chief Janowski that we're just adding language that those could be maintained at the department level because we're keeping everything for safety forces more than just certification itself. So we're going to keep everything. The question is whether we're going to keep it at DAS or whether it's going to be kept at their level. Bruce has indicated that he's going to keep his at his level because he kind of does that now. Chief Donahue, do you agree too?
Yeah, I agree.
So they're going to. So that's why we're adding just the language that says may be maintained at department level.
What are you reading from?
DAS 002.
Where's that?
It's in the
For
packet.
some
It's
reason.
not in your Dropbox.
Oh, let me check.
I'll put it in.
No, that's okay. If I'm not sure.
I can. You want to see it?
No, that's okay. Let me see if I got it.
I can.
Well, okay.
I'll read it to you as well. The language that we had in there says training and certifications required for position held would be kept in the active personnel file. And then we had a note, all police and fire training and certifications will be maintained. The language we're adding says, but may be maintained at department level. That's the only change.
So what does that mean for you? Yeah, again.
It's something that we have been doing at the fire department level. What that means is for all of our guys, when they go to a class such as a seminar, some of their college work, and so forth, we maintain their certification. So it's kept on record showing that they've completed that. And that information is then accumulated as far as numbers and sent to the state for our personnel for the recertifications.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But we were noticing that I think a lot of the police files were this thick with, they took a class on dealing with stressful situations. They took a firearms 102. They took a ARIDE, which is the OVI detection. And there's just a lot of these certificates that were just crabbed up the file, which they're not required for the job, but for police and fire, based on the nature of their work, it makes sense to maybe keep them out of that personnel file because there's really no need for us to have it unless litigation happens or something.
Yeah, and our guys maintain the original. We scan ours and put in an electronic file.
And then in terms of background investigation, that was, I think, the thing that I had.
That was the one that we had really left hanging last time, yes.
Okay, and that, again.
So to go over the whole issue there, basically, when police and fire employees are hired, they go through a very extensive background check, and a lot of that material is somewhat sensitive. I would probably rank it as the polygraph, the physical, maybe the criminal history, but I'm not really as worried about that. But those items are things that we go through, but once they've passed it, we don't really use them at all. So we felt that that's sensitive information in our files that we'd rather not maintain. I'm talking to both chiefs, we don't ever go back to use it once they're here. They've successfully put their probation. We don't use it, but we do sometimes get records requests for it. And if there's litigation, they do ask for it, and we have to provide it because they're not strictly medical records, they're pre-employment screens and things. So we would rather not maintain sensitive information that we're not using. So that's our recommendation, was to get rid of it after their probation is done, or 6 months. But we're extending that background check for the 5 years just to be able to show, and that's kind of through all their steps anyway, to show that we went through the background check, they didn't have any criminal history that we ignored or something.
Okay. So the action then that you're recommending the commission take this morning is?
If the commission was inclined, if we were to approve these 3 scheduled changes that hopefully Elaine has been able to give you a paper copy of,
Yeah, I got it.
I could go back, add that to our draft that we approved last time, and then we'll kind of have a pretty decent schedule that I'll send to the state for them to file on their, I don't know what they do with it, but they'll approve it and we'll have it officialized.
Okay.
That's not a word. It'll be made official.
Yeah, I think the only issue that I think one of the reasons I was concerned about is if we had an issue with a particular employee and if it was police or fire, would any of that background information, that background investigation be helpful for us in any way? And
we sat and jawed about it for a while, and Chief Donnie's here, he might be interested. I mean, we've had plenty of discipline situations, for example, but we can't really go back and use the background they were hired.
No, not necessarily. It just helps to perhaps inform us maybe after the fact. But I'm okay with what you've come up with. You guys have spent time on it, so.
Just one final, to put you over the edge of feeling better about it, you might find someone helpful, but I'll tell you that in certain litigation opportunities, they find it more helpful, but they use it completely out of context and not helpful for us.
Got it. Okay, well, why don't we then, so we've approved then the other piece. This was just a piece we held
off on it.
Okay. So Dean, did you have any thoughts on this?
No.
Okay. I would take a motion then to approve the revisions to the retention schedule as reviewed by Attorney Schulman, number 13.
I'll make the motion.
Okay. Do I have a second on the motion?
I'll second.
Is there any discussion on the motion, which is to adopt these 3 revisions to the retention schedule? Hearing none, all those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, and let the record reflect that Chairman votes aye as well. Okay, so now we are, I think, privileged to have Rachel Hostetler here today. We could maybe pull this, could you pull this whole thing back? It got moved last night for a meeting that we had, and it's normally not that close.
Getting
There
to
we
know.
go. And
That's about right, Tom.
that's great. And Rachel's here today just to talk about document management and where we are on this. This is something that we talk about from time to time, and it's gotten more traction in the last, probably the last several months. Thanks, John. And one of my, I know, Rachel, you've spoken to Dean about it, you've spoken to me about it. You convened a working group, I think. And, you know, part of the issue is what's the city's overall strategy when it comes to not just complying with the Ohio Revised Code, retention schedule, but how do we manage our documents and what's our overall, what are the tools we use to manage them and what's our overall kind of game plan? And we're not alone in this. And so did you want to?
Yeah, so Dean several months ago approached me to start looking into document management as applying to easements and potentially the finance records. And I started doing some digging into that, but without a clear directive, there wasn't an obvious path forward immediately on that. But the last few weeks, it became clear that multiple departments were pursuing document management individually without really talking to each other, even though their needs and concerns had a lot of overlapping features. And so Bill was in the process of purchasing a product called Bluebeam, which is a plan review system to review his engineering plans. And Dave brought it to our attention that OnBase, a document management system, also has a plan review aspect, which can be integrated with our work order management system, CityWorks. We talked with Bill, and he was willing to put his purchase of Bluebeam on hold while we researched some alternatives so that we didn't ultimately end up duplicating products across the city. So I've gotten a group together to start figuring out what the priorities are as far as document management goes, see how those overlap, because a lot of what various departments need are very similar. And so if we can find a solution that can work across the board in the city rather than having 5 or 6 disparate solutions, that would be much more efficient for the city and potentially more economical. So we had our first meeting on Monday, and we've established some priorities that seem to be consistent across departments. They include things like records that are searchable, either because the PDF is searchable by text, or because there's standard naming conventions, or there are indexing and keywords. Removing the duplicate documentation we have left and right across the
Triplicate.
Yeah.
Beyond triplicate.
Yes, the multiple copies of the same document that are across the S drive currently, as well as being able to tell which the final official documents, as well as revision control, because there are certain documents that get updated every so often. And very often people have made a copy of, say, the request for leave form, and it's on their desktop. Well, if DAS updates that form, now you have an outdated form on your desktop, but having a final, this is the official one, this is the only one, is really important. Plan review is also a key priority, as is the ability to mark certain data as privileged. We obviously don't want anybody necessarily being able to get into the personnel files that DAS holds or some of the legal files. And so being able to limit certain groups to being able to access certain privileged information is very important, as well as a CityWorks integration and a GIS integration, since a good percentage of our documentation has a geospatial aspect to it. And being able to find that documentation by going to a map rather than having to remember the specific easement number would be greatly helpful for being able to locate our information. So those are some of the priorities, not listed at any, those are not one necessarily is more important than the other. These are just some of the themes that came out in the discussion. Yesterday, a group of us met with OnBase to discuss their plan review product. The discussion we had indicated that OnBase does do a lot of the stuff that we are very interested in plan review, and right now we are waiting to hear a response about what the cost of that would be, so we can compare it to Bluebeam and possibly other systems. We are hoping to talk to a few other municipalities about how they handle document management so that we have a clear idea of what people similar to us are dealing with this issue, because of course it's an issue across the board. The goal, what will happen is by the end of January, we will have come up with a recommendation for how to proceed with document management. whether that is a large-scale citywide project, or we determine that it is better for us to do smaller projects with various software that doesn't necessarily integrate with each other. And that will be, but we don't have that information at that point since we've
Sure.
only just started this.
Yeah, it's a big, complicated.
Well, one thing
issue.
that Rachel's doing right is she's got all the right players at the table, because if you just go with an end user to say, go buy something, they might not get the right solution, or if you just rely on IT only, they might not know. And so the first meeting was very good. We had pretty much every department represented. I'm there from legal, but I also know about record stuff. So I thought it was a very good first meeting, and it's going to hopefully come up with something cool.
You know, one of the things, and I don't know, when we talked a month or so ago, one of the challenges, and I posed that to you, was to get knowledgeable about what's out there as far as tools. What are some of the products? What's the differences? Does it make sense to standardize? A lot of things just said. The other is to get a little bit of a feel for what kind of records do we all have out there at a department level, and is the nature of the records conducive to having one size fits all or some variation of that. And hopefully through engaging departments, it's not, that a part of that is that they come in and you can get a pretty good feel for what and how. Because I think one of the things that can be important, along with just getting a little, establishing a bit of a strategy moving forward with how we handle records, how we access records. We're going to go out and seek perhaps new software for a lot of our financial applications, some of our payroll applications. And it'd be nice to have, it's not going to be to either make a part of our RFP or something to provide to the potential vendors to say, generally, here's what the city does with records that are created or not, even and especially electronic records that we prefer. And I'm just throwing things out there. We prefer things to be into this format, into PDF or whatever else version. It has to be upgradable. It has to have the capability that if we change or there's some new version of whatever is the background software behind that we can implement that system-wide without having to individual or whatever. And a part of that, we either can direct them towards or have a sense of this software, this proposer's system works with whatever else it is that we do have. And so that may be just thinking about, again, ultimately it's early in the process, but at some point being able to to kind of have that as a, regardless of the software. We went out and we earlier, or actually it was later last year, and just took a long time, selected a vendor for our software, our cemetery database. And again, it may be such that if there's 8 or 9 vendors, that process is let's choose one of these because what their product does fits pretty well in line with what we want to kind of continue to do with our records management system.
So I guess a couple things occur to me, Rachel, in terms of this overall effort, and one of them is there's the issue of what are the tools, and there's a lot of them out there, whether it's OnBase and others. And part of that, I would ask that you reach out to your counterparts at the county, just to find out
They are one of the people that we are.
how they're, because this is an area where perhaps collaborating with them in terms of storage and things like that there might be options. And then some of this also, I think, is there might be some process mapping involved where you take a certain situation, a contract comes into our office, it gets signed, I sign off on it, Darren signs off on it, Dean signs off on it, the contract is for a public works project. Where does that original reside? Where do the copies reside? There's all of that, easements and all of those kinds of things. I think that would be instructive in terms of how to kind of identify where the weaknesses are, I guess, where the overlap is, oh, well, we have a copy, well, we thought you had the original. No, you have the original. That
Yeah.
kind of thing. And
And
That's-
that kind of stuff is currently beyond the scope of this initial investigation.
sure.
But the outcome of this investigation may be a recommendation that we start mapping out our processes. But initially, what we need to do is just figure out what we even need, what the questions are, and what it would look like to proceed. So things like mapping out our workflows, they should come out of this
One of
investigation.
the things I think to facilitate that, and that again was part of even me reaching out to you at one point in time, or it was previous, either it was in June or it was in 2013, Records Commission meeting, noting that, we've got responsibilities as a public entity to maintain records.
Yes.
There may be operational issues why Bill may want to use Bluebeam and Dave may want to use whatever InSource or who knows whatever else to do their job. We have a responsibility to maintain records and maintain access to the public to those records. And if we use our records retention schedule, and that's again why we need to get somebody involved. It was before you even became GIS at an IT level to kind of take a bit of ownership, because this used to be in years past, you kept the ledger books and you needed to make sure you stored them in a place where they wouldn't flood and all these, and this was going to, the world's changed and most of this stuff's evolving. We had a discussion today about, what was it, about police and fire recruitment stuff.
Yeah.
And so we decided, we'll let the police and fire departments keep that. Well, I don't know, should our records retention policy get more specific to say that it shall be kept and it shall be kept in this format? And or even that we then look at it, John can say, yeah, I do that, but John leaves and another fire chief comes from somewhere else and he's like, I don't know, where is this stuff?
Yeah.
And, so you got that potential sometimes when we're delegating responsibilities outside of that. But whether we look at the actual retention schedule and say, is there perhaps a product out there that could, maybe it's a separate database system that says these things can flow up into that it can be broken down into categories somewhat based on a records retention schedule. Because one of the, I think, beneficial process enhancements that maybe could be achieved is, this has been the problem, whether the records are electronic or manual. It's great that says we're going to keep it a certain period of time, but somewhat there's been cases out there that says if we keep it too long, we're violating the policy too. These need to be destroyed or eliminated.
Yep.
And that's not an easy process at times after the fact, because what ends up happening is they still accumulate, and they may not be accumulating in a closet or a storage cabinet, they're accumulating on the S drive or wherever else. Whether there's a product out there that these things could be made a part of, that you could go in there and you could program it, so to speak, or you could set parameters that say, we've created, the software allows us to come up with the schedule numbers and the whatever else. We're old schedules, they don't really mean, other than whatever else, but that becomes the issue that says if it's a S, instead of maybe the number being DAS-1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it has some other number in that is important, that it says it might be DAS, but then it's -6 whatever. That 6 is a thing that says it's to be kept 5 years. 5 years from what? 5 years from the date that gets entered when that record gets maintained or created. And so we have that wherewithal to more efficiently go back and manage the records, not just keep them in electronic format.
And record retention was definitely one of our priorities. Important, not only coming up with a product that can keep track of record retention, but making sure we actually come up with a record retention timeline that gets stuck to.
And I know Tom had talked about, flow charting some of these processes, and then the example he gave was an agreement. But again, the place maybe to make that a little bit more manageable, because it can be pretty extensive. Start talking with departments and it goes, they've got all kinds of different things and whatever else, who knows what. But what is the record retention policy, so to speak, for an agreement? At some point you got to define what's a contract, what's an agreement, what's an arrangement, what's whatever else.
To that, I think there's the retention schedule that's prescribed by law. I think there's the practice that might be a little different depending on
the municipality. And I know in our case, we may not be required to have kept a contract from 1965 when they built the bypass around Delaware. But I do know in discussions that we're having today about our transportation issues, I want to be able to access that information that's archived hopefully somewhere here in the city, as opposed to, oh, we pitched that because it said we only had to keep a contract 10 years, it's 50 years. But that's still important. So that's where I think we need some policy decisions on our part in terms of, we know that we don't have to keep it this long, but practically speaking, it's important. In an electronic version, we don't necessarily need the blueprints, but when the city hall was built, or I can just think of a number of things. I mean, we're the keepers of the record, and that's important. And so that needs to just factor into your
That'll be the
discussion.
challenge, and it takes, I think, a certain amount of engagement from the department personnel, and a certain amount of, because you can think through situations and know exactly what you're talking about. It's easy enough from a records retention law standpoint to cover the basis to say we're going to no longer of any administrative value. So that gives you the out that says you can keep it longer than that. You don't have to get rid of it in 10 years or anything like that. The flip side is just say keep everything permanent. But then if you put that in your policy and for whatever reason you don't keep it, then you're on the other end of that thing.
Right.
But at a department level, what tends to happen is most of these things fall down to the administrative assistants or somebody else in that department. And as they transition or whatever, they're going to look at these things and says here, agreement, 10 years, I got rid of it.
Yeah.
And then at some point, some other person's going to, so some of it becomes how that database gets managed. And if you have flexibility to say, this document is one of those that needs to be kept for a pretty extensive period of time, just becomes incumbent on who knows that. Is it going to be the city manager, secretary? Is it going to be the city manager?
City clerk?
Well, one thing there's some cool there's kind of 2 points to follow up. There's some cool software out there that, to Dean's earlier point about actually making sure it happens, you can attach the schedule, at least this was 5 years ago, I'm sure it's still there. You can attach the schedule to the document on the front end, and then at an expiration point, either you get a report to confirm or something where it's like, okay, these documents are hitting their pre-described retention period. And so it effectuates getting rid of it, because once you scan something, you never go to it. So that's one thing that, these schedules are not magic, and we put a lot of time into really thinking about the revisions we've made in terms of, okay, personnel files has always been kept forever, but what do we really need to keep in it? Some parts of personnel file we want longer than others. That's what these changes are. It probably would behoove us maybe at our next meeting or in between then to maybe look at some of these areas where you might want to keep things longer. Anytime you have judgment, you don't know it's going to be there. If you say, if it's up to the admins to code it the right way, but maybe there's certain types of agreements in your experience you've noticed you want to keep longer than the 10. We can change the schedule to say real estate and construction projects, I'm just going off the top of my head, are 20, but personal consulting contracts are 5, because we don't really care about the consultant who did a labor study 20 years ago, but 5 years is helpful.
Right.
So we can get more granular, and I would recommend doing it as much as possible on those schedules, because as Dean says, you're gone or I'm gone. This is sort of the first place someone will look to see how long they should keep stuff. So if we want to pull some stuff out and make it longer, we can do that.
Well, I think we probably should maybe at least put language in there that gives us the ability. If it's no longer.
Oh yeah, and you can always keep stuff longer. It might be helpful if you know that you always want. I'm going to come up with a bad example. If you always want road construction projects, we'll just break out a whole schedule. It says road construction projects keep longer. That way, there's no, we'll just keep it if we need it. It's more concrete. So we can do that on this end, and then the technology side of it.
Well, any kind of vertical construction project. I mean, the water treatment plant that was, the last couple of years was built. The 25 years from now, it may be helpful to know that you have access.
And I think those schedules might be pretty long, but I don't remember how long. I don't remember how long those are. So
But anyway,
that's a good concept.
Yeah, to me, some of this is just practical stuff. And Elaine, what's your take on this now that you've been council clerk and you're the keeper of council records and could be keeper of all of our records?
Get rid of filing cabinet in the basement. That's for the clerk.
No. I think the biggest thing is again, there is quadruple records everywhere. Because I'm putting something in archives, it's in subject files, it's in the Gazette file. It's just, we're taking up space in so many different places. And one, it's time consuming because we're putting them in all those different spaces, but actually even between him and I'm like, did you put this here? Because I'll find something there. And so we're doing double the work. And so I think that's a waste of time too. So we just need to streamline a little bit and figure out why we're keeping so many of the same things in different spots. And because I'm putting it in planning, and then I'm also keeping it in council side, and then I'm, and
Why do you think it's kept in so many different spots?
because I was told to. But I mean, that's why I'm doing that. I understand, planning, like the planning cases, they keep their cases. But then I'm also keeping the exact same case in council after council approves it. It goes into their archive. So, I'm not.
And I don't know if OnBase provides answers to those questions, or we have to as a city, and then OnBase is the tool to assist us with that.
One
That's
thing
really
that,
ultimately up to us, I think, in terms of deciding,
And I think
right?
for a planning example, if they have a case 2017-2463, and then we take it from planning into the council process, it would just be easy to somehow attach that signed ordinance into the planning, where it's.
one
you
thing
can
that
merge it.
some of
And
these,
then what?
I'm
No, go ahead. Just finish.
Well, basically, like merge it together instead of me keeping the same thing here and here.
what I was going to say is some of the stuff that the software solutions have, it's called deduplication. So it goes through the server place and finds all the thing and says, I don't need to keep 7 of them. I only need to keep 1. But the reason you're keeping it in all those places is because people don't know how to find it. You're
Well-
keeping it there because I don't remember if it's going to be in the Merrick Parkway folder, or is it going to be in the roads folder, or is it going to be in the planning folder? So there may be a naming convention, you don't have to do that, or searchability, but there is software out there that will pull out.
That's the key right there, in my opinion, is labeling it consistently between departments. So for instance, planning knows this is how you look up something, and city manager's office, or if Dean needs to get into it, instead of I label something one way, they're labeling it a different way. And so that's kind of where some of that duplication is happening too, because we don't realize we're not looking it up the same way. So I think consistently figuring out a labeling system, does that make sense?
Yeah, but that's that universal challenge that's been there forever. It's how we came up with the Dewey Decimal System in libraries. And I mean, the simple task of even when Barb was here, Barb would keep invoices in a filing cabinet for me to get back into them, how she would file something based on the name of the company. If it was CDC Concrete Inc., she might file it under concrete because that's what it seems to her. I think it should be under C or wait. It is a tough one. Is there a standardization? And sometimes maybe the software, where it's got that capability that it can kind of help coordinate that. And then again, I think the task becomes so insurmountable when you start getting into all that stuff. But at a starting point, I think if we look at those core records that need to be maintained, you were mentioned, I don't know if it was the context of what you're talking about, that there's a planning document related to this development approval, and then there's one at the council. But at some point there might be 2 exclusive type of records. If it's the planning commission's approval and what they did to approve that versus council then ultimately approving it, even though it's the same potential plan, is that arguably 2 different records, the planning commission's deliberation and approval of something in city councils. But again, the records retention, we work from there, start working our way back, and maybe even, you get a little bit more of a chance maybe to start making it manageable, because you can, you go on, it's a tough thing to get to. It's tough for me to come up with my own naming convention for my Excel files, being able to find it in my own PC. Remember, okay, where should I put this one? How should I put this?
How are we working in terms of GIS and the use of GIS for our land records? That is moving along, right? I mean, so if 54 Green Lawn Avenue is brought up and the city passed an agreement that affects that piece of property in terms of they have to annex in 2035 if they don't have whatever. Is that, I know we were heading in that direction. Are we
It is.
any closer, or is that in process?
Well,
Less
so
of a document.
annexation specifically is a problem I'm working on with
Just all these
Dave.
agreements that we enter into.
We
with
don't
different-
currently have the agreements linked to maps in any geographical way at the moment.
That would be, I
Um,
think,
That
helpful, just because
is,
the property's not necessarily going to change, but there might.
yeah. And so part of what's going on with that is that there are extensive agreements. And so it is a large, long-term project, but also the way so for the utility plants, I currently have a polygon layer in there. So if the utility plants cover a subdivision, I'll draw a polygon around the subdivision and then put the S-Drive file server link in as an attribute of that polygon layer, which works. You can now click on that polygon and you can click on the link and get to the PDF. Great. Until the file name changes and everything's broken. So as far as linking our agreements, I am not moving very quickly on
Right,
that
it's-
until we have a document management solution. Because if I start now with our file server links as they stand, we go into a document management solution,
And it
everything gets
changes.
moved, and all that work has to be redone. And it is, I spent the first year in my position when I was public utilities, GIS tech, getting just the plans linked appropriately to the GIS. And that's a much smaller
But in the
set of
future,
documents.
I'm going to click on my house and I can see all the plans,
Ideally.
developments, the easements,
If we
ideally.
go with a system that easily integrates with GIS, yes, 100%.
And somebody remembers to go click on that GIS map. Because part of the
Yes.
challenge is, it's one thing to create links to make it easier if it's one of us looking for information related, because I'm having to be doing this. The other issue, which is a big concern, and it perhaps isn't as much map related, is who follows up on this, the requirements that are agreed. It's one thing to see the document, who's going to go in and then look at it and say, okay, keep in mind that this said, after 7 years, if this doesn't happen, this triggers. And that may be more a function of the software. If there's a product out there that says you have certain agreements, as Darren said, you might break those agreements or contracts into different categories, some of which are real estate, and we want to, attach something to them. But some of us may be development-related follow-up agreements. And somebody has to know when we enter into something that requires something occurring, not just we contracted, this is what we agreed to, and if ever there's a dispute, here's the contract and we can read the language and interpret it. But many of our agreements have follow-up issues. And the key becomes, what's the trigger, what's the mechanism, what's the to-do list to do that?
Yeah.
You can isolate those type of agreements, and you might have to put a little bit more input into a data input. But someone needs to own those to go in there and say, on a quarterly or monthly basis, maybe the software can help us to say, okay, this one has, this next issue has to occur date. Because that becomes ultimately
Right.
one of the things we need to do. There's all kind of conveniences we can create to do our jobs day in and day out, and have access to the contract and make a link, but even that's not always so simple.
Oh,
because
yeah.
It can change, but
Sure. No, it's-
somewhere along the line, that becomes
I
an
mean,
important factor.
I have come up with a solution, the action, so there are agreements, I think Green Lawn is one of the areas where there's an agreement that by a certain date
They're supposed
and or
to
on
annex.
sale after. I've built a little script that I haven't had a chance to go with Dave yet, which will drew the polygon of the area where the agreement takes place, and then every month you run it against the parcels. If it's sold and it's after this date, then you get a list of parcels that
Oh,
should
okay.
be annexed.
That's cool.
Again, this may not be the best way to handle things. Dave brought to me this issue. I worked on coming up with a solution within our current context. And I've done Hills Miller, 2 areas I had to work with to just prove that my script would work. And I haven't had a chance to sit down yet and meet with him and
there are a number
discover
of
if it
those.
works the way he wants it to, and
Right.
then implement it beyond those 2 locations, because obviously there are multiple different locations, and it may not work perfectly if it's not based on sale date of the parcel, if it's based on some other,
Yeah, sometimes
Things
it's
happening.
sale and contiguous.
yeah,
hard
and
'cause it's
contiguous, then that get like, there's a
not
chance I could figure out that contiguous portion via scripting, but there's also a reasonable chance that that is,
But if you just get a list of all the sales, I guess you so it's contiguous now. I mean,
yeah,
you don't need the computer to do everything for you.
Yeah.
That's still helpful.
Well, I think it's an ambitious effort, but we need to take it on, and I think it's good. I'm glad you're involved in this, because there's a technology piece of it, and right now
Yeah.
you're leading the effort, which is good. So you think by the end of January,
we
you guys will
will,
have a recommendation how we approach
we
this?
must have a recommendation by the end. The agreement with Bill to put Bluebeam on hold was that we would quickly come up with a recommendation. And the recommendation may simply be proceed with Bluebeam for the time being on, like, or what your solution is too ambitious at this point.
Just
The
history of Bluebeam is really something that I guess I'm the culprit, because I was speaking with our consulting engineers who work with planning,
Yeah.
who work with engineering, and work with utilities. Their observation is you need a system where everybody is linked digitally.
Yeah.
And there are tools out there, and Marysville uses this thing called Bluebeam, and that's how that
Yeah.
all got started. But that's a tool. There are others out there.
Yeah.
But the idea was that we didn't have to hand carry plans around from one office to another. It was a way of doing it. So
And
it
listen,
might be On-Base's approach to that. There might be others, but
and there's a perfectly reasonable chance that a fully integrated document management
to me, that-
solution, while ideal for handling things, maybe outside the scope of what the city can
Yeah,
actually
and there's a
reasonably afford.
dollar piece to this too.
Yeah, no, and that's one of the things that we are trying to be very aware of, is the fact that, sure, if you have enough money to throw at a problem, you can do anything
So
you
don't
want.
benchmark against Dublin necessarily.
Yeah, exactly, exactly.
Yeah, but at times we often look at the economics and say, we couldn't afford to probably get that product functions and is viable and is reliable.
Yeah.
It's going to be in 3 years, they're going to say, well, we no longer do this, you got to buy this up. Those economics, it's amazing what it costs us not to be able to be on top of it.
Yeah.
It runs against.
Or even the answer of,
Our economic development agreements related to things, all of them tend to have all these different creative provisions, and after they're inked, we're moving on to the next one, and they're,
Yeah.
so. I don't
but
know.
even the aspect of efficiency, yes, it may be expensive per year, but how does it compare to hiring a couple more employees to handle the workload because we're not handling it efficiently? And so there are things to be weighed, and it may be that number.
Instead, it needs to not just, it's not just the cost, but at the end of the day, the complexity. I'm there, short of artificial intelligence really evolving to the point where we don't have to, it helps think for us.
Yeah.
It may not be quite the tool that you think it is. And that
Exactly.
oftentimes is the case with a lot of software application processes. Boy, especially when you look at it online, it looks like it'll do everything. It'll make coffee.
Yeah, yeah.
But when
Because
you
they're-
start using it, it's like, wow, it doesn't this, and it
Mhm.
couldn't rely on that because it didn't quite do this the way I thought it would. And you end up with probably less of a product, but maybe you're
Which
better
is
off.
why we
But-
wanted to be actually using the various products,
Right.
because, the demos they give are for a, perfect world, everything
sales.
runs smoothly.
Sales.
Yeah.
some
But
of
how does it
may-
work in an actual
some of it may
municipality?
be that there's not necessarily just a magic pill out there as far as a software package that's going to come in and solve us all. But we still need to be a little bit responsible in looking at the types of records.
Yep.
Like I said, we really got to keep this focused on records retention, because otherwise it'll be a departmental thing between
Yeah.
planning and engineering, and that's okay for them. But if this isn't the avenue to take, we still need to have some basis focused on this, because we're creating a lot of electronic records, and some of them are permanent. And might be down
capacity when we meet, whether else in 10 years saying, whatever happened to that permanent record? Where did it go? I
They'll
don't
be
know.
asking
Somebody
the
kept it
name.
on a disk somewhere. And it may be that just individually, we need to really think about technology changes. You mentioned somebody reading the file. That's one of the downsides to having electronic. You have the paper copy in the ledger, they're not going to change stuff. Still going to be there. It might burn or might,
Yeah, but if it gets filed wrong, I
there's
mean,
all different kinds of ways, but that was the concern. Oh, we're going to flood or it's going to burn. Well, there's ways that electronic stuff
we
can
get lost as well, yeah.
in that process too. But again, maybe it's some standards that say this is what can be done with electronic records, especially things that have a period of time that they need to be maintained for. And maybe there's a way somehow even to back out just those and back them up. And at some point, it has to be converted to a different medium, so it's able to be viewed as you move down the road, or at least take a look at it from that perspective and say, we're doing what we can, but
Right.
there's not much else you can do.
Let's plan on a meeting, a records commission meeting in February,
Okay,
after you had a chance
Yeah.
to prepare your report and your recommendations.
Great.
And discuss it. Just a couple of, one comment is, I know planning right now, you can hardly walk through the planning department without hitting a box that's full of files. You notice that?
yes.
Are they in there?
So
like
those
bundle up time
files,
or
those
something?
are all, this is just kind of they're planning files that have been scanned or haven't been
I
scanned.
believe they have not been scanned, but I'm not sure about the ones that are up here. I know the ones in that building that Dave is going to have to move here shortly. He needs them scanned and has a budget to scan them, and a quick search for just getting an idea of boxes there were of plans, and we're looking at, and now, mind you, this is just a quick,
Yeah,
look at a couple places online that will do these kind of scanning for you, but we're looking at like $13,000.
Did you look
It
at
is.
Iron Mountain?
I've not specifically requested from them.
I only say that because they did our
So
vendor
Iron
council
Mountain,
books.
so Iron Mountain is the people I've been in contact with for engineering scans, and the amount of scans they want to do is significantly higher, and their number was closer to 53,000. And that is a rough number because the numbers we gave them were so rough.
Yeah.
But like I said, based on the 118 banker boxes worth as in the basement of that building, we are looking at probably about $13,000.
So this may not be the right time, and I really want to interrupt Tom, but I work on the Ohio Electronic Records Committee, and one of the things we do is we created a tool to decide whether it's worth scanning or not. There's this push right now to scan everything, but oftentimes it doesn't make sense. If you're keeping it for 5 days,
it's not costing you to store it.
yeah, or for example, if you keep things permanent, oftentimes you don't want to scan it because it's it's not iReadable for computers if Skynet takes over, or you can lose data, or the format's change. So sometimes permanent records you do want to keep in paper for that reason, but we can go offline on that. I don't know how long they need to be kept, but you might not want to scan millions of
At least
documents.
most of what engineering at least is trying to scan is our plans, et cetera. And part of the problem is that they are currently storing them in a place that I believe Parks is going to be moving into that
Well,
building.
yeah, some of this is just a function of
It's-
space.
yeah, it's
But that's
logistics.
not necessarily why we would scan them.
'Cause you-
We can find the
Other-
space.
Well,
Yeah.
the other thing is if no one is really accessing these hardly at all, so one of the benefits of scanning is you can email it.
Yeah,
You don't have to pay for copies later. But
Yeah.
if it's never going to be used again, another solution might be, like, I don't want to endorse Iron Mountain, but they have a service that they use for the state where you don't scan stuff, you just
They just
send it to
store
them on it. So if it's supposed to be kept for 50 years, they'll keep it for the 50 years and send you a sheet. Hey, these boxes are the ones we're going to get rid of unless you say don't.
And
Yeah.
that-
And that might be cheaper than scanning.
Until
Yeah.
they go out of business, go bankrupt, then you're but some records, the thing is, the irony, and even when you talk about engineering records, and I don't know, maybe, or even they've got boxes up there, at some point, finding a solution before, why does it get to the point where they get into boxes, and then we're gonna come back and scan it all? Part of the solution is saying, when you're creating the documents, when you're getting them, someone has to make, and nobody wants to do that. That becomes the lazy side because we're all busy. It's kind of like filing away. We used to have the problem back in the day with tax returns. They would pile up because nobody wanted to go in the file cases. Everybody hates doing that, but why do we generate those? Years ago, we talked about engineering and about plan documents, about getting a standardized format that they come in electronically. You know, I don't know, maybe there's still companies out there that don't do that.
No,
They still
everybody's doing
draw.
that. These are, I think, legacy documents.
These are legacy documents,
But again,
and that's
you
what I
wouldn't
believe the ones that Dave has in the Gazette
Maybe
building also
some in
legacy.
engineering, but I can't imagine that they keep building up in planning because, you know, maybe down in the basement, but even at some point in time,
I don't have
what
the
are they
detail of what the
generating on a
planning
day-to-day
ones
basis?
are.
And that's where it gets back to Darren. People everybody wants the easy solution. Go buy. I don't want to be bothered with it. It becomes a task at that department level to say what is coming into our office, what do we need to maintain electronically for whatever reason, and make sure you get it either in a scanned format or you scan it right then and there, attach it to the file. And it's a heck of a lot less costly to do that than to try to come back after the fact and figure out what you can or can't do.
So before engineering begins that process, we need to coordinate because I don't know if it's worth spending that money. It's a function of, it can be, you know, we need them every couple of years.
Yeah.
To get to this. That's when it's that cost benefit that you indicate is.
Or if we do it in a way that works today, but, you know, sometimes it can.
Yeah.
You know, then you talked about the meeting coming up in February, and I think, you know, Rachel's going down a certain path. I think that needs to continue, but I don't know, you mentioned a couple software versions that are out there. Somebody through your connections in there that there's either companies out there that really focus on the records retention side of it, not just city documents and things like that, that might come in and might be worthwhile to hear somebody talk about it.
We
Hear a vendor.
could, I know
Yeah.
she was gonna start working on that too, but I can reach out, I don't know if February might be short, but I can definitely try to collect some names and stuff.
And they may be two different issues of sorts in a roundabout way, but
Well, that's good. Two other resources, ICMA.org, which is the International City County Management Association, has a very, very good website that has topic areas, and I know that there's been a lot of there's extensive written information about what communities are doing. And the Alliance for Innovation, which we're members of, and Kim can get you links to those resources, but they're good in terms of you can put a query in, what are communities doing regarding document management, get information back, and that's helpful.
Awesome.
So it's not just Ohio, it's broader. So why don't we just plan on a meeting, depending on what you have, and is there anything else that we have today? All right, we'll stand adjourned then at 9:30. The last meeting of the 2017 year. Thanks, Rachel.
Thank you.
So is Janelle working with you on all of this too? Okay.